Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program Then and Now. I am your host and presenter, obviously, and my name, some of you may already know, but some of you may not know, maybe first timers. I am Prince Emil Kroma from the channel Then and Now. Right. So let me see if I can get some music going. I'm just playing this song and dedicating the song to the people of the Middle East. The peace process, if there's anything called the peace process in the Middle East again. But obviously, to 60 or so Palestinians that lost their lives during protest on the basis of an action taken by the US President Donald Trump. It was a terrible decision, and it obviously had consequences. So everything lies squarely on the President of the United States. But also, there was something to rejoice about. Here in the United Kingdom, on just yesterday, the 19th of May, the Prince, at least we've got a real Prince, so there's something to rejoice about, got married to an American actress, Meghan Markle. But all the brouhaha surrounding this wedding were two things. One, of course, is the royal, the monarchy in England, with an American actress of a mixed background, black and white. But some of us are getting excited again, as we were some 10 years or so ago, on the back of the message of hope. I'm talking about Barack Hussein Obama, where most of us thought that all the woes surrounding black people will then come to an end. But do you know that it got worse? Yes, it did. Do you know that nothing specific, because sometimes we get confused, nothing specific was done for black people. It was always either a group of others, either the LGBT, or the Hispanic, African, American, something, never specifically for black people. So here we are again, 10 years on, the fairy tale ending of the marriage between Prince Harry. I like the guy, man. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I wore this because this is what I wore yesterday in celebration of the event. And the closest I came, here was my cup, my mug. Okay? Of course, it's from M&M, but it's emblazoned with the colors of the Union Jack. So I use this occasion to toast the royalty, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, as they are officially known now. The title given to them by the matriarch of the monarchy, Her Majesty, the Queen. So Harry and Meghan, I say, long may this union last. So the Palestinians and the Israelis, I hope you find peace. And hopefully peace very soon. This is a place where Jews and Muslims, pray together, they worship together, and they've lived for thousands of years. What has suddenly gone wrong? And it's just on a downward trajectory. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why we're airing this video, of course, I'm not going to talk about the many problems that we've had today, and we've ended up here. Hopefully this one goes through. But I wanted to talk about policies based on evidence, how effective those could be for people of our kind that come from deprived areas, deprived countries that have the means, the wherewithal, the resources, the minerals, but it's not properly managed due to policies that are not effective, that are not thoroughly thought through. And in the end, they become toxic for us. And instead of benefiting from them, they become, the enemy of the people. In this regard, ladies and gentlemen, we do know that a plethora of corruption and maladministration of the African continent, honestly has been the nemesis of development in the entire continent. And the country where I come from, Sierra Leone, is no exception. So we know that the lag behind um, what you would call strategies in the proper administration of revenue, the revenue end of things, they're really lagging behind. You could say corruption and many other things, but it's all back again into policy, which I want to talk about today. So what we're going to attempt to do here now is to look at how issues relating to that of accountability and transparency, pair them together. It's a commodity or an item or items that are very scarce. And these scarcity of this particular two items, accountability, I call them items, and transparency, are hurting the prospect of development through the kind of poor policies on whether you want to say mortality, the reduction of mortality and mortality rate, the unemployment of 60% of youthful population, which is having a backlash, much more social problems that trickles down again to the very government. So why not sort it out there, up there, before it comes down, because it ends up with you again. And then the citizens as a whole en masse, they suffer. Okay? Poor infrastructure, and there's always this vicious poverty cycle. And much more through that we could do to avoid all of these, if only we can think about public policy in the sense of well thought through academic research and etc. And this well thought through policies based on academic evidence is really, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to talk about today. To begin with, every policy research and analysis does ask questions. Every policy research and analysis does ask questions. Relevant questions, I would say, because that's the beginning of a carefully thought out process. That is the beginning. So questions that it will be asking will be like, why? Because if you put forth a policy, you have to know why you are putting forth the policy, or people are going to be questioning, why is it? That has to be thoroughly explained. Ladies and gentlemen, this is key. First question will be why? Why is the policy? And let's say something quickly. Let me say something quickly. Why the why question is effective in the pursuit of policy. Sometimes policies are not carefully or well thought through. Sometimes policies can be flux. Policies has to emerge from the effect. That's why the definition of policy in itself is kind of significant, because policy sounds simple, but it's complex. You might say it's basically rules on what an administration or a government or an authority does and what it doesn't do. It doesn't necessarily mean what it does. It also means what it doesn't do. But it has to be carefully thought out, which in the end should be in the interest of the people. So the question why is, what is the agenda? What is it? Why is it? What is behind it? There's also the question of for whom it is done. Remember, I just said it should benefit, in a social sense, the people. So for whom is this policy being done? So you're asking this question, who are the beneficiaries? Who are going to benefit from a policy that's been proposed? A policy that is time scaled, in other words, a question asked when, that is the due date. So a policy that is time scale is a good policy. I mean, these are all the hallmarks, the good traits of the development of public policy. So these key questions, they have to be asked, okay? They really need to be asked. Another thing we need to be careful about in terms of public policy Again, that falls into the questions that I've just asked, but I'm just trying to reiterate, which is who commissioned the policy? Who commissioned it? So we want to look at the independence of the policy. So there are no ulterior motives that are certain, in the political realm of things. Who are those that are going to benefit? Because you can be in a position of trust, in a position of power, and you are enacting policies which you will derive the utmost benefit from because there are motives behind it. Instead of benefiting the people as a whole, in the end, the reason why you've commissioned or asked for this policy to be enacted is because you've got an ulterior motive which will be of benefit to you either in the now or in the near future. So you want to know the independence of such policy, who commissioned it, who is funding the policy, what's the location, where is it situated, okay, and the potential influence. That's what I'm saying. The potential influence that can be put or exerted on those that are responsible for developing the policy, the researchers, those that are looking into it. So if a politician has got ulterior motive, what's going to happen basically is they're going to exert pressure on the policymakers. That's why the time scale of the event is important. That's why the independence of the event is important, and many others to those questions that we've just asked. So in policy, public policy, there are two kinds of policies which are kind of significant, slight definition in meaning, variance in meaning. They're not the same. They sound the same, but there's a variance. Okay. These two types are a policy of analysis and an analysis of policy. It's difficult for you to understand, the difference there because they almost sound alike. It's just like it's been reversed, it's been tweaked, most likely been reversed. A policy of analysis and an analysis for policy. So though they sound alike, let's bear in mind that there's a slight variance, there's a slight difference between the two. When you're conducting an analysis for policy, ladies and gentlemen, you eventually do one thing, which is you advise and you inform policy makers. You advise and inform policy makers. And what do you advise them on? The next step that they need to take. Again, two types of policy analysis: a policy of analysis and an analysis for policy. In conducting an analysis for policy, you eventually end up, ladies and gentlemen, informing, telling, helping the policymakers with what is supposed to be the next step that they need to take in the pursuit of the policy that they are working on. Cost-benefit analysis, impact analysis, forecast analysis. These are all the traits, and this is what these policymakers are going to be armed with. What this does do is it helps inform these policymakers on the decision process. We're running kind of late, ladies and gentlemen, so we'll try to make it a little bit fast because I want this video to end hopefully in half an hour's time. In this pursuit of policies that are evidence-based, that are supposed to be effective after asking all these questions, it is imperative upon us to move away from ideology and probably, or most likely, settle down to pragmatism, which will be almost science-based, if not science-based. Economic forecasting is central to all of this, because what this does again is it directly informs and helps those that are trying to effect a policy on the decision-making process. Okay, that was policy of analysis. Remember, I said two, there are two. Now let's talk a little bit about analysis of policy. What this one does is it more or less refers to the in-depth understanding of the policy context, more or less the effective understanding of the policy output. In the policy context. So an in-depth understanding of the policy context is what an analysis of policy more or less refers to. I was just drinking from an Union Jack cup, which I used to toast the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. That's Meghan and Prince Harry. So policy output and policy outcome are all processes of making policy. So within this, what we then do, we can then think of more scholarly approaches. I'm introducing the word for the first time after talking about academic-based evidence studies in terms of public policy or policy analysis. So in analysis of policy, we have to refer to an in-depth understanding of the policy in a contextual way. So the policy output and outcome are the processes of making a policy. So within this context, we can think of more of a scholarly approach to policy research. So understanding the context, ladies and gentlemen, of policy, the relationship, the process, the type of influences, the relationship among the many, many actors who will be partaking in the process, the type, the output of certain policies, the benefits to the beneficiaries of the policy is what we think about in this sort of analysis. So we move on to policy research issues. Okay, there are particular problems when you're conducting policies, especially so. And remember that this is related to where we largely, those of us that are watching this tape, largely where we come from. So there are always particular problems. I spoke of it at the beginning of this tape. When we are conducting policies in countries which are in the developmental stages or transitional countries, such as ours, that's why I've chosen this topic. So the series of problems that we have to bear in mind is the shortage of reliable and valid data. We really, really need to keep that thing there in mind. Okay. There's also another key thing. Most of we is at the struggle for fair and award. I want to use the appropriate word. But this over-reliance on international NGOs, okay, for data, it can sometimes penalize we, if not most of the time. Me personally want to think, because I've had the experience, okay? We over-rely on them too much because we have come to trust them. We trust them more than the locals. And are the locals, and then they feed them this information. Remember earlier on, we talk about the independence, of policy making, the process. The independence is quite critical. Why? Who? Time scale. So this is it. So we over-rely on international NGOs, then at the gun. And sometimes the manual within the give, because remember, I say these NGOs are reporting to somebody from the outside. The outsiders potentially could have interest in these policies the way they want enact. Remember, we talk about the influence, the potential influence of them policy there. The reasons then why most of the policies then can fail. But also the expectations, the objectives where they can set for we, not right. The expectations and the objectives, that they set for us are just not correct. Because if you ask these NGOs, you use your own measurement. Remember, we're talking about states back home, And then the NGOs headquarters are based here in Europe, and the measurements that they are using for the NGOs on the ground to use to develop the data, what they measure, how they publish their records, the weaknesses and distribution of the data is problematic in itself. So once you set us that bar and the bar is high enough, and then it becomes difficult because it doesn't relate directly to us, or you need to have a better understanding of the construct of these transitional states. Ladies and gentlemen, we are already about 20 minutes, 21 minutes approaching into this. And like I said, in half an hour's time, we will end this. There will be a part 2 later. So some of the data, as you know, are provided by these NGOs are quite critical, honestly. Remember what they measure, how they measure, what they measure, who provide them with the wherewithal, who provided them with the manual that they're going to be using. Have they really understood the nature, the culture? Because this is paramount of the country. If no, then obviously the policy eventually is on a path of disaster. So qualitative research, we also know, is rare in this part of the world. Most of what I'm talking about in terms of policy is looking at retired Brigadier Maada, Julius Maada, His Excellency Julius Maada, his speeches both at the state opening of Parliament, in which he talked about policy, and in inauguration. Today we focus on one. In subsequent broadcasts, we'll focus on others. In terms of agriculture, I talk about agriculture in which it will implore or ask local banks for lend the private sector for agricultural purposes, which is very good. A healthy nation is a nation that's well-fed. A well-fed nation is a nation that thinks, that develops, that innovates, that creates. So agriculture is very paramount, and we get a kind of soil. So the president spoke of increasing food production, attracting reliable private sector players. This is all good, supporting private sectors for large-scale agricultural production and processing, not only the production, but also the processing and marketing. So you see, that's why I say I'm getting really excited, because the president is not only thinking locally, he's also thinking beyond the borders, beyond the shores of his country. So talking about processing and marketing, this is good. So support to local industries engage in the fabrication from tools, for farm tools and supplies for other farm products. Another good one as well. So once that is done, it also provides jobs. I understand, say you get about 200,000 people that are reliant, that are effectively employed within the agricultural area of the country. Directly and indirectly, there are 600,000 other people that are indirectly benefiting from agriculture. The president also talked about mechanisms into place for public-private sector in terms of tractor management, which is about the rehabilitation of feeder roads, linking the farming communities. But brilliant. I mean, this man, he get the experience anyway. He was there, he's been there, and now he's back. I see no reason why this guy should not succeed. If he doesn't, posterity will never forgive him. Okay? Posterity will never forgive him. Because this is all critical and this is good. So he talked about cash crop, how it constitutes a major source of forex. Of course, no country is an island. We deal with others. So we sell with crops there abroad, we're able to generate foreign money. So that foreign money, they come to the country, we're able to use them for do other things them we regard, with international commitments. That's good. So his administration will focus on the rehabilitation of existing plantation and establish new ones, focusing on cash crops. So it will also help to facilitate the establishment of cash crop cooperative and provide training in processing to ensure cash crops become competitive for our people, for his people. Brilliant. He talked about the tourism industry, which we will talk about in a subsequent broadcast, how it's underdeveloped and underfunded. Now that we know in the previous administration that the economy had been diversified, it has been taken from the direct focus of mining minerals, which we know for a long, long time, into ecotourism. That area, they needs to be developed, really, really needs to be developed, because we stand to profit a lot. So all this come in the process of making of quality, well-researched, scholarly-based, evidence-based, academic-based public policy. This is what is required to get these things to be very effective. So we need for focus on qualitative research, which is quite rare. A heartful we find down in our part of the country. So even when you find them, not to better one, and we need for focus on this. So research, yeah, the president talk about stakeholders. So we also need for do research on policy stakeholders. So if you try for focus a policy, especially on the agriculture one I just talked about, in which you take into consideration your stakeholder them, then it's imperative on you, sir, and your administration for conduct qualitative research on your policy stakeholders. Very, very important. Okay. So we are already 26 minutes. We've got about 4 or 5 more minutes, and then we'll try for end this. We'll continue another day. So we've got unclear procedures. It's obvious there are unclear procedures at government levels on conducting and the use of policy research. This needs to change in order for the policy to be effective. So in terms of government, you sometimes want to ask, although you should know this already when it comes to who actually conducts policy research. Again, remember those two policies: analysis for policy, policy for analysis. So if you're asking that question about government levels on who is conducting the use of policy research, when you talk about analysis for policy, it's normally done within the ranks and realms of government department. Now we're talking about civil servants. They definitely are responsible for this, and they will be conducting, not only conducting, but also commissioning such researches. So if we look at the scarcity, ladies and gentlemen, of resources within the context of few things. One, the weakness in the distribution of data, which we talked about, and the qualification or the rareness. Of course, that's a new word because I put up on Creole a bit. But anyway, the way how qualitative research is rare in especially when it comes to stakeholders, you can't hardly find that in our country. The unclear procedures at cabinet level and the low service morale, civil service morale, lack of pay, lack of incentive, lack of professionalism. All of this, if the president is really serious, he really needs to focus on this. For only with these things being taken into consideration, can policies that he wants to effect, which can have a positive effect on his country and countrymen, which I believe are his intention, will work. So these are things that need to be taken into consideration, sir. So if we take into account how this policy making, can be politicized, that also you need for consider. So move ministers then away, or get a body, an independent body, we go scrutinize these people that have been commissioned, to do these researches, the civil servants, to make sure that it's not politicized, or tell you minister them for back away. Not begin they can't try for influence the policy, which will go your own way because you want them for go your own direction, because probably you look at political gains or political scoring points. You can actually really avoid that. Okay. So public policy, from the beginning, we talk how complex it is. Complex to the point where it looks like, say, hard for define. And hard for define, because it's something complex, then there are some technical difficulties there in trying to define it. Okay. We also say it basically lie on waiting people and do, not only people, not ordinary people. I mean, again, for be people in places of authority, people in places of authority, what they do. And it's not only about what they do, it's also about what they don't do. That's policy. That's public policy. Okay? But it has to be about a rule-based system in helping people. This is quite fundamental. Okay? We try for understand public policy, we tend for look at potentially people that we don't write books on the situation there, because remember when we talk about academic based policy. So somebody will look up, you have been try for look at the definition for public policy. Of course, there are many out there. Okay. Two people I want to look up just quickly, briefly, for the benefit of this broadcast, the listeners and viewers, is it is a description, an explanation of the causes and consequences of government or governmental action. And this was by an author called T. Dye back in book where he published in 1991. In 1991. So the description and explanation of the causes and consequences of government's action. Remember, that's what we said. Government obviously is authority. So the cause and consequences of actions taken by government is what will be regarded as public policy. I also look up somebody else, when Paul Kearney or Kearney. I don't know whether I pronounce it right. He writes something, a piece, an academic piece, academic journal, when a title, Politics and Public Policy. I mean, these two then kind of intertwine. Okay, so if you listen to all the things I don't say about that, we come to a point where Paul Kearney try for define them as the first thing that we do when studying public policy. This is not Paul Kearney. The first things that we do when studying public policy, we get to understand on how to define them. Okay, so public policy, according to Paul Kearney, is the principal guide to action taken by the administrative, executive branches of the government of the state. I carry on now my own way, because I understand what they say. Branches of the state with regard to the class of issues in a manner consistent with law and institutional custom. So one look long, other one look short, but basically the same. The cause and consequences of government action. That's T. Dye 1991, and Paul Kearney in say action. Is the principal action that a government could take, or administrative or executive branch. So when this is not Paul Kearney back, because he talk about politics and public policy. When you talk about in politics inside public policy, it becomes disastrous, because there are many other sources of legitimate knowledge, and the evidence cannot and should not become an alternative to political choice. And this is critical, and I will read this again. This is critical. When it comes to politics, it becomes really disastrous, because even though there are many sources of legitimate knowledge and the evidence, we can't afford to put those aside or make them politics become an alternative to political choice, become an alternative to evidence-based policy. We shouldn't do that. That's why most times these policies, they fail woefully. While of course we agree, say politicians then get for use their judgment, but that judgment when politicians and they use not to like medicine. The judgment being used that is being asked for politicians to use. It's not like medicine, because medicine by and large is science. It's proven. It's a proven science. So that judgment is not based on proven science. So while we go listen to the judgment of politicians, okay, we know say that waiting and say not likely means say that that's not the fact. So you want to move away from that and look at things that are based on evidence. that comes from the mouth of scholars, people that have done their researches based on evidence. Now, Tony Blair, one of the most popular politicians in our time, both globally and locally, until he gets this Iraq debacle where he go join George Bush, we help for denting in reputation so badly that how many years now he's left office is still struggling. One said, in terms of public policy, and I quote, "It is what matters, what works. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, why bother? Just put it aside." That's Mr. Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister who won 3 consecutive elections. I also want to quote another Labour politician, Michael Foot. In a short one, Michael Foot. I mean, policy, because it's based on evidence and therefore there's going to be many arguments, politicians don't have the patience for this kind of stuff. They just want to get things done. Remember, by and large, politicians just look for the time. Therefore, they score points and points and points that will keep them popular, especially in an age of populism. Politics now is an age of populism. Donald Trump, Jeremy Corbyn, and etc. So they just want to get the thing done. And people and benefit, of course, benefit. So Michael Foot said, "I don't want evidence. It gets in the way of my arguments." That's Michael Foot, a former Labour politician as well. So it's important that policies are based on evidence. We see how we are now struggling in terms of Brexit. That's another big one. We will find time probably to talk about this. It's another big one. Brexit, it wasn't well thought through. People presented alternative facts rather than academic facts. So today, hence, the struggle continues on the basis of an issue as big as a nation, a mighty nation as Great Britain, removing herself, from a body. So they're not saying that she should not have removed herself, but the basis that we know now for her removing herself were based on alternative facts instead of real facts, evidence-based facts. But today we are talking about other countries such as Sierra Leone, etc., etc. So it's very, very important, ladies and gentlemen, that when it comes to policy, public policy, we should conduct ourselves rationally. The approach should be rational. For rational approaches can bring up solutions. So we need to conduct things like benefit analysis and implement what make sense. It should not be like Donald Trump just sweet talking people and telling people, the punchlines, and automatically, and there he goes. He's now in the White House. He's got a support base, but the United States, by and large, is being redundant on the world stage now. See their political allies and friends across the other side of the Atlantic talking about Europe. In the Iran deal, see what's happening. It seems like the Europeans have finally found a backbone, a spine to stand on and say, no, enough is enough. Can't continue to be vassals. This is huge in international relations. This is huge in terms of geopolitics, what is happening, okay? The United States unilaterally removed herself from a climate deal. I mean, you got friends. This is what Donald Tusk said. If you've got friends like that, what's the use of looking for enemies? Wow, that was charged, that was loaded. But from what Europe is saying, even though people had their doubts, it's beginning to look more and more like they will remain as it is. When I say as it is now. So they're turning their back away from their friend in the United States. They are turning their back away from their friends in the United States. Okay? And they are trying to take their own path. Because why? Their very existence is threatened. Economic interest, which is significant. I mean, they stand to lose so much, from Iran. So immediately when the deal was done back with President Barack Obama, the Europeans ran in there with their multi-billion pound companies. The multinationals are all in there. Boeing, the Americans, of course, are there as well. But Europe, Airbus, okay, Air France, the hotels, the hotel chains, they are all there. The exploration phase of petroleum gas, which Iran is rich in, Total, BP, they're all in there. And then the president is trying to move them and deprive them of this. Is he going to substitute what they are going to lose there? I don't think the Europeans are going to do this. There are many questions, and people are sort of pessimistic when it comes to this because it's huge, and I can understand, but it seems like there's much to lose. So the Europeans are saying no. And in fact, what they've done, they've enacted, I think there is a clause in their constitution which goes back like since 1996 or so. And for the first time, they've enacted it. They've made it active. In other words, they will use that to protect their companies from sanctions being threatened. Wow, sanctions being threatened by your friends, that they're going to sanction you as well. Anyway, let's move on. That's why it's good to come up with rational evidence based on academic research. Do your cost-benefit analysis and always make sure that you roll out, you implement what makes sense. Evidence-based policy, ladies and gentlemen, evidence-based research is relevant for exploring issues and concepts of interest to the public, whether it's one of poverty alleviation, the healthcare system, free healthcare, free education, as Maada promised, violence against women, reorganizing the healthcare system. It has got to do with public policy. So, ladies and gentlemen, we should be ending this video any moment from now. I think I've said enough for today, but evidence-based policy is important. I'll just say one or two more things quickly, and then we end this video, which is the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, His Excellency retired Brigadier Julius Maada promised free education and many other things. I'm imploring on you, sir, in order for this to succeed, if you listen to this tape, then you will see all the hallmarks of success, what needs to be done. It has to be based on academic, proven, scholarly research. Let's try to promote qualitative research, especially on our stakeholders. In terms of this free education and many other of your policies, for them to be effective, sir, you need to do this. This is about public policy. And this is the way forward. Those questions that we asked from the beginning, commission it. Why was it commissioned? When? Time scale, due date, beneficiaries, all are critical to all of this. So only when these are asked and is carefully thought through, can the policy in itself be effective. So as researchers and members of scholarly group who try to call on expert explanations or in-depth comprehension of various social or economic problems, the starting point is going to be on evidence-based, not on alternative facts as Donald Trump. It's got to be based on truth. A truth which is based on irrefutable evidence. And that irrefutable evidence is solidly or must solidly be anchored on research and analysis. I will end with the word of another Labour politician. Today it's all about Labour. Yeah, maybe the next broadcast will be about conservatives or Republicans or Democrats, who knows. David Blunkett, another one-time serving minister under Labour, Tony Blair's government, and subsequently the man who succeeded Tony Blair, Gordon Brown. Mr. David Blunkett once upon a time said, a good government is a thinking government. Rational thought is impossible without good evidence. Social science research is central. Social science research is central to the development and evaluation of policy. Ladies and gentlemen, I will end here for today. Next week, we'll continue starting off with the limitations of policy analysis. I want to be talking about public analysis now. There's a likelihood that we will have here on interview and human rights and immigration lawyer. So for those of us who have got human rights problems, immigration issues, we are going to be having an immigration and human rights lawyer right here on this channel, God willing, next week, provided that all of the apparatus are in working order. So for now, I've been your host and presenter, Prince Emil Chroma. Saluting you all for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important. Your comments are also highly, highly appreciated. Please send me your comments. For in so doing, we can understand the way forward. What do we need to do? What did we do? How did we do what we do? What do you appreciate? What you don't? But above all, your subscription is critical for the continuation of what I do. On this note, I say thank you very, very much. A journey, 1,000 miles. Hmm.